Hi, today we're going to take a look at the Sigma 50-100mm f1.8 lens. We have used this lens in Photokina and in the past few weeks as well, and we have quite a few things to say about it. So let's dive in.
We recently published our review of the Nikon D500. When we tested the camera, we used it mostly with the Sigma 50-100mm f1.8, which makes for a very powerful combination. This review reflects over a month of use with this very interesting and truly innovative lens. Everybody was surprised when Sigma announced the 18-35 f1.8 lens. No other manufacturer had, or since released, anything like it, and it finally gave APS-C shooters a truly fast pro-grade lens they can enjoy, and it was widely used ever since for both stills and video. Since then, Sigma released many other art lenses, but many users were waiting for a longer sister to the 18-35mm, and early this year Sigma came out with the 50-100mm f1.8. Many compare both lenses to the 24-70 and 70-200mm full-frame duo, but it is actually a kind of different. The Sigma are both 2x zoom lenses, while the full-frame versions are close to 3x, and despite the superior light-gathering capabilities of the Sigma f1.8 lenses, in terms of background blaring on full-frame versus APS-C, the results are pretty close. Like we did with the Nikon D500, here are our thoughts on the Sigma 50-100mm f1.8. The build quality of the lens is very high, as you would expect from an art lens. The zoom ring is closer to the camera and has a good friction. It is, however, a bit thin. The focus ring is in the front. It is wider and easier to adjust than the zoom ring in terms of friction. There is very little space between the two rings to hold the lens in a way that will not change any of the rings, which can be a problem, especially if you have larger hands. The lens comes with a built-in collar, which works very well, but in our opinion is actually the lens's biggest design flaw. First, you can't remove it. Second, the foot is way too close to the zoom ring and is almost always in the way no matter how you adjust it. And finally, the foot itself is really small. We would much rather have a larger, longer foot which the user can remove, and we would definitely remove it immediately for most of our users. Other features worth mentioning are the autofocus manual focus switch, the only switch on the lens, the hood which has a rubber grip that is the only way to attach it properly to the lens. We actually struggled with it a bit initially, and the very large 82mm front element. As you can expect from a 50-100mm f1.8 lens, it is big. About 190mm or 7.5 inches in length and heavy, just under 1.6 kg or over 3.5 pounds. In terms of features, possibly the biggest miss here is the lack of image stabilization. This would make the lens even bigger, heavier and possibly larger, and certainly more expensive. But in our opinion, it could have helped a lot when shooting handheld at low shutter speed. And yes, even with f1.8, you will shoot at low shutter speeds quite often, certainly indoors unless you want to kick the ISO way up. Before we talk about optical performance, let's discuss autofocus performance. You use this lens with the Nikon D500 and our old D7100. Initially we got about 50-60% hit rate. The misses were not consistent. It was not all front focus or all back focus. This was kind of surprising, and after we talked to the CEO of Sigma during our interview in Photokina, he suggested that we will send the lens and the camera for calibration, which we did. The result was an improvement in autofocus accuracy to maybe around 70-80% hit ratio. We would like to mention that shooting at f1.8 at 100mm isn't a simple task, and we also discovered that in order to get images which are not blurry with this lens, which as we mentioned has no image stabilization, you do need to use fast shutter speeds, preferably over 1/200th of a second or even faster. On the bright side, autofocus speed seems quite fast, although the lens doesn't have a limiter, which could have been a nice addition. As for sharpness, we tested it on the D500. Wide open, it is quite sharp all across the frame, but if you close it down a bit by about one stop, you see noticeable improvement in sharpness, but even more so in contrast. Beyond f2.8, you are not going to see a lot of improvement in terms of sharpness or contrast, which is pretty impressive. In terms of vignette, you see quite a bit of dark corners wide open, which is reduced considerably at f2.8 and is practically gone by f4. Against bright sunlight, you can see some chromatic aberration in some of the images that we took. On the bright side, with the hood on, we didn't encounter too much flare with this lens. At the end of the day, the Sigma 50-100mm f1.8 is a very impressive lens optically with some inherent limitations, including the lack of built-in image stabilization, pretty short focal range, and a pretty bulky design with a foot which can't be removed. We could live with all of these if the autofocus performed consistently, but at least in our testing and even after calibration, which did help somewhat, we still got more misses than we would like to see. We would like to mention that other reviewers seems to have a different experience in this context, especially those using Canon cameras, so it might well be an issue which is brand specific or maybe even limited to specific models or even specific to our test camera and lens. Regardless of camera, you do need to learn to shoot with this lens. Shoot at faster shutter speeds than you might otherwise consider handheld and shoot more until you nail it. When the lens does nail it, the results are just fantastic. If you have a chance, test this lens on your camera before you buy it, and as long as you understand the limitations that we have just mentioned, you can certainly consider this lens for your next purchase.
So this was our look at the Sigma 50-100mm f1.8 lens. You can read the full review on lensvid.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Next time we're going to take a look at another Sigma lens, the tiny 19mm f2.8 Sigma lens for E-mount. See you next time.